Welcome to this episode of Great Cities and Institutions. Today, we are going to look at the history of Athens, the city that invented democracy. Every week on this channel, we step inside the great cities, empires, and institutions that shaped the world we still live in today, tracing not just when they rose, but why and what it actually cost to build something meant to last forever. Some of these stories are about walls and monuments still standing. Others are about entire systems of government and belief that vanished centuries ago, yet somehow still shape how we live, how we're governed, and even the words we use without most of us ever realizing it. Today's story belongs to a city that gave the world the very idea of ordinary citizens governing themselves. A radical, fragile experiment that lasted less than 200 years before collapsing under the weight of war, plague, and its own contradictions. This is a city that put its own greatest philosopher on trial and executed him by popular vote, that built one of the most beautiful buildings in human history to celebrate a goddess, and whose army, at its most celebrated moment, was outnumbered by an invading empire roughly 10-1, and won anyway. This is the secret history of Athens, the city that invented self-government, and then discovered exactly how difficult self-government actually is. According to Athenian legend, the city's very name was decided in a divine contest between two Olympian gods. The sea god Poseidon and the goddess Athena each offered the people of the region a gift in exchange for the city's devotion, with the legendary king Cecrops serving as judge. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and produced a spring of water, though the water turned out to be salt water of little practical use. Athena, by contrast, offered an olive tree, a source of food, oil, and wood all in one. The people chose Athena's gift, and the city took her name. Historians treat this as founding myth rather than fact, but it captures something genuinely true about how Athens saw itself, a city that prized practical wisdom over raw, showy power. For its early centuries, Athens was ruled first by kings, and later by a narrow aristocracy of wealthy landowning families, a system that left most ordinary citizens with essentially no political voice, and left many small farmers trapped in a brutal cycle of debt, sometimes selling themselves or their own children into slavery simply to survive a bad harvest. By the early 6th century BC, this inequality had grown severe enough to threaten the city with outright civil war. Into that crisis stepped a statesman named Solon, appointed around 594 BC with sweeping emergency powers to reform the system before it collapsed entirely. Solon cancelled existing debts outright, physically removing the boundary stones that marked mortgaged farmland as a public symbol of the relief, outlawed enslaving Athenian citizens over debt, and reorganized political power based partly on wealth rather than birth alone. He also softened the city's brutally harsh existing law code, associated with an earlier lawgiver named Draco, whose name still survives today in the word draconian. Solon's reforms satisfied nobody completely, a fact he apparently accepted as the price of genuine compromise, and he reportedly left Athens traveling for 10 years afterward so the city couldn't pressure him into amending his own laws. His reforms held off the immediate crisis and planted the seeds of the more radical system that followed. That system did not arrive smoothly. Athens spent much of the following century under tyrants, a word that at the time simply meant a ruler who had seized power outside the normal process, not necessarily a cruel one. The most notable, Pisistratus, actually governed with considerable popular support, investing heavily in public works and festivals that benefited ordinary Athenians directly. It was only after his sons inherited his position and proved far less capable and considerably more oppressive that Athens rose up and expelled its tyrants entirely, setting the stage for the city's true revolution. In 508 BC, a reformer named Clasthenes, himself from a powerful aristocratic family but backed by popular support against a rival faction, introduced political changes so fundamental that historians mark this moment as the true birth of Athenian democracy. Cleisthenes reorganized the citizen body into 10 new tribes, deliberately mixing citizens from coastal, inland, and city districts to break the old power of aristocratic family networks that had traditionally dominated politics through regional loyalty, and established a council of 500 citizens, chosen partly by lot rather than election alone, to manage the day-to-day business of government. Direct political power was placed in the hands of the assembly, open to any adult male citizen willing to show up on the Nix, a sloped hillside near the Acropolis that could hold several thousand citizens at once, where major decisions of war, peace and law were made by open vote in front of the entire gathered citizen body. It's worth being honest about how limited this democracy actually was. Women, enslaved people, and foreign residents, together, the clear majority of the population, were entirely excluded from any political voice. Still, for its era, the idea that ordinary male citizens, not merely aristocrats, should personally debate and vote on their own laws was a genuinely radical, unprecedented experiment. That young democracy faced its first true test almost immediately. In 490 BC, the Persian Empire under King Darius invaded Greece, partly in retaliation for Athenian support of a failed revolt by Greek cities under Persian control, landing an army at Marathon. Heavily outnumbered and receiving no help from Sparta, which delayed its army for religious reasons tied to a sacred festival, the Athenians marched out to meet the Persians directly on the open plain rather than wait behind their walls, a decision many of their own commanders considered close to reckless. The resulting Battle of Marathon ended in a decisive Athenian victory. The heavily armored Greek infantry routing a Persian force many historians estimate significantly outnumbered them. According to a later legend of uncertain reliability, a runner named Pheidippides raced the roughly 26 miles back to Athens to deliver news of the win, collapsing and dying after gasping out his message, a story that inspired the modern marathon race, though most historians doubt it happened exactly as later writers described. 10 years later, the Persians returned under King Xerxes with a far larger force. The defining battles came at Thermopylae, where a small Greek force including 300 Spartans held a mountain pass for days before being wiped out, and at Salamis, a naval battle in the narrow straits near Athens. It was at Salamis that Athens made its truly decisive contribution. The Athenian fleet, built on the advice of the statesman Themistocles using profits from a newly discovered silver vein, lured the much larger Persian navy into cramped straits where its numbers became a liability and destroyed it. The invasion collapsed shortly after, and Athens emerged as the dominant naval power in the Aegean. What followed was Athens' Golden Age. Athens transformed a defensive alliance called the Delian League, originally formed to guard against any future Persian attack, into something closer to an Athenian empire, relocating the League's shared treasury from the island of Delos to Athens itself over the objections of several allied cities, and using the funds for an ambitious building program on the Acropolis. Under the statesman Pericles, who dominated Athenian politics for roughly 3 decades despite holding no permanent formal office, Athens constructed the Parthenon, a temple to Athena so refined that its columns are subtly curved rather than perfectly straight, a deliberate optical correction still studied by architects and engineers today. This golden age also produced an explosion of philosophy and drama that shaped Western civilization more than any comparable stretch of decades before or since. The playwrights Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes wrote tragedies and comedies still performed today, more than 2,000 years later. It was in this environment that Socrates began his relentless practice of questioning ordinary Athenians about justice, virtue, and knowledge in the city's public spaces, a habit that made him beloved by some and deeply resented by others. Athens' golden age did not last. Long simmering tension between Athens, a naval and commercial power built on democratic openness, and the rival city-state of Sparta, a militarized, rigidly hierarchical land power deeply suspicious of Athenian ambition, erupted into the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC, a brutal conflict that consumed nearly 3 decades. Early in the war, following Pericles' deliberate strategy of withdrawing behind Athens' walls and relying on naval supply rather than risking open battle, overcrowding inside the city helped a devastating plague sweep through Athens, killing a significant portion of its population, by some ancient estimates as much as a quarter of its citizens, including Pericles himself, removing the steady leadership that had guided Athens at precisely the moment it needed it most. Without Pericles' measured judgment, Athenian strategy grew increasingly erratic and aggressive under a series of less disciplined successors, culminating in a disastrous military expedition to Sicily in 415 BC, launched partly on the ambitious urging of the charismatic but unreliable politician Alcibiades, that destroyed much of the city's fleet and manpower in a single catastrophic defeat far from home. Athens fought on for years, increasingly desperate, but finally surrendered to Sparta in 404 BC, losing its empire and its fleet, and, for a period, its democracy itself, briefly abolished by Spartan-backed oligarchs known as the 30 Tyrants, before Athenian democrats regrouped and restored it within about a year. It was in this bruised, anxious, post-war Athens, still processing the trauma of defeat, the brief brutal rule of the 30 Tyrants, and the humiliating loss of its empire, and searching for someone to blame, that the city's relationship with Socrates finally curdled. In 399 BC, roughly 5 years after democracy had been restored, Socrates was formally charged with corrupting the young men of Athens and failing to honor the city's gods. Charges many historians believe were partly a delayed proxy for anger at his known association with several supporters of the recent, deeply unpopular oligarchy, including its most notorious leader, Critias, who had once been among Socrates' own circle of young followers. Tried before a jury of several hundred ordinary citizens, chosen by lot, Socrates reportedly used much of his defense not to grovel for mercy, but to defend his own way of life, comparing himself, according to Plato's account, to a gadfly sent to sting a great but sluggish horse into wakefulness. He was convicted by a narrow margin and sentenced to death. Given the customary chance to propose an alternative punishment, Socrates' own half-serious suggestion that the city instead reward him with free meals for life only hardened the jury's mood. According to Plato, Socrates ultimately declined an apparent chance to escape into exile arranged by wealthy friends, arguing it would be inconsistent with everything he had spent his life defending, and instead calmly accepted the sentence, dying by drinking poison hemlock surrounded by his grieving students, a death still studied today as one of philosophy's defining moments, and a stark reminder that the same democratic machinery Athens pioneered was also the machinery that condemned its most famous thinker. Athens never fully recovered its earlier dominance after the war, though its intellectual influence only grew stronger in the centuries that followed. Socrates' student Plato founded the academy in Athens, and Plato's own student Aristotle later founded a rival school called the Lyceum, together establishing Athens as the philosophical capital of the ancient world for generations, producing ideas about logic, ethics, and politics still taught today. Politically, though, Athens gradually lost its independence, first to Macedon under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great, and later becoming simply one more city within the Roman Empire, its democratic institutions surviving in increasingly ceremonial form long after real power had shifted elsewhere. Athens' true legacy was never really about the roughly 2 centuries its actual democracy survived, a remarkably brief span given how permanently it reshaped human political thought. It was about proving, for the first time in recorded history, that a large community of ordinary citizens could genuinely govern themselves through open debate and direct voting, rather than simply obeying whichever king, tyrant, or aristocrat happened to hold power. And that this same radical freedom carried real, sometimes fatal risks alongside its genuine promise, a tension the modern democratic world still wrestles with, more than 2,000 years after an Athenian jury voted to execute the man who had spent his life teaching them to question everything, including themselves. If this story moved you, do 2 quick things before you go. Hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode of Great Cities and Institutions.